I thought we could do the blamer from the get out of bed and be spontaneous persona or identity. So 20 or 30% of the time, I'll stay up late, as I did last night, and then sleep late, and then I'll wake up slightly off edge due to the jet lag of changing sleep. Like, I went to bed at 4:30 last night, it's now noon, and this creates a certain jet lag as opposed to going to bed at 1 and waking up at 9 or something like that. So got some jet lag from pivoting sleep rotation through the 24-hour cycle. Now, I wake up, lay in bed, and cuddle with Philip, enjoy things, and then come out and do something with some excitement and mull about things. And this morning I've mulled about blame. And so typically I wouldn't put this persona on camera. One, I don't want bright lights in my eyes, so we're doing this lights off. Two, of course, I haven't touched my hair, haven't washed my face, haven't brushed my teeth, but often I'll dive into something in this mode. And so we got two identities here. One is this identity, which is kind of excited and do it now. Let's do this, let's do that. And then we have the topic, the blame. So the blame identity is, I would say, if we look at how is it that I come to blame, and it's actually the critic, how is it that I come to criticize so much of myself and the world? And so that's also, I think, a good connection to make, is between when you criticize the world, you criticize yourself. When you criticize yourself, you criticize the world. And so I think we can go into why does a traumatized child criticize themselves? Because the alternative is so devastating for a child to realize. Every child, every infant, to some extent every teenager, is dependent on the cult, on the family system, for all of their human needs: to survive, to feel secure, to have love and belonging, self-esteem, which at that point is outside validation. Then we have, are you going to develop your talents or not? Do you have an opportunity? Are you going to be spat at for trying to develop music in a farm or whatever it is? Are you going to have a chance to bring your gifts into the world? Again, dependent to a large extent on the family and the cult. And you're not going to really transcend to be part of something bigger than yourself until you meet those basic needs. So there we have need. Now, that's a very vulnerable stage. I absolutely depend on these people for all these things, for all these reasons. Okay. And these people are messed up. That's a hard thing to grasp, because it's kind of like getting onto a plane. Now, if you're on a plane and it's already taken off, what do you want to feel? you realize something's wrong. Planes flying erratically, up and down. Seems like maybe one of the engines caught fire. This is a bumpy ride. Now, if you're a passenger on the plane, do you want to say, you know what, these pilots that I'm absolutely depending on they're addicts for one. They're pathological liars for another. They're incompetent. They didn't take any training whatsoever to fly this plane. They just volunteered or inherited a plane and said, come on, let's load this plane up. And off they took. Well, that's incompetent parenting for you. Not a single hour of competent parental training from anyone in the cult. Decades and generations of sustained abuse patterns in one form or another. They, of course, had tons of misery in their own childhood and decide to have kids. And let's see what happens, right? So you've taken off. You're born, and there you are. Now, it's tremendously traumatic to realize just how little your parents know at this stage of the game. Number one. Number two is shame-based incompetent parents tend to attack mentally or physically anyone who questions their competency for which they feel shame. Now, in a shame-based cult, you get punished for doing something wrong, whereas in an empathic cult, you get helped for doing something wrong. Oh, you're doing something wrong. Let's help you to do a better way. Well, I can count on one hand the number of times anyone in our cult came up to my parents and said, oh, my goodness, you've had 5 children and you don't know what you're doing. You're causing suffering for yourselves, for each other, and your children who are in a dependent state. That's a terrible thing. Let's give you a formal hour of training. One formal hour, right? Pilots train for X thousands of hours and all this, but no, we'll give you just one to be a whole parent. Break all your intergenerational abuse patterns in one fell swoop, right? And so here you go. Let's give you an hour. No, there was never a single moment. And I want to see. Wait. I want to see. Now the downside to this. The downside to this stay up all night thing and change things is it puts stress on the body. And stress on the body then triggers more allergies. So I have allergies to pollens and to wheat and to dairy and alcohol is an amplifier to those allergies. And so is sugar. And so if I do those things, have a bagel and some jam, for example, then you've got wheat allergy, a sugar amplifier, and then a stressor in the body, and lo and behold, I have more hay fever. So, there is no, this doesn't happen in a shame cult. no one comes over and helps the parent, because in a shame cult, to admit that you don't know what you're doing is punishable. To not know what you're doing is punishable. To make a mistake is punishable. And to fail is punishable. And it's punishable by gossip, it's punishable by social ostracization, it's punishable by lower wages, it's punishable by all kinds of things. Our cult has a plan to punish you for not knowing what you're doing, and it also has a plan to make absolutely sure that you don't know what you're doing by institutionally banning all parental training from work, from kindergarten, from middle school, from high school, from college, by making sure that most of our role models do not know what they are doing. But because they are also shame-based, they will pretend to know what they're doing so that you're confused. You know, you tell a parent, Mom, I thought you said, don't do this. So why are you doing this? Now, the parent that is shame-based becomes righteous, indignant, looks in horror that you've actually questioned the obvious, slaps you in the face, shouts at you, don't you talk back to your parent, don't you sass me, don't you do this. Pretending, in other words, to a 6-year-old child, a 10-year-old child, pretending that they know what they're doing and that their insanity is absolutely not to be questioned, because it is insane to say under no, do not lie, it's bad, you're don't lie, and then their mom is lying to dad. Did I miss something, Mom? You didn't say don't lie except if it's to Dad. In fact, if I recall, you were upset when I, having observed the behavior that goes on in this cult, was lying to Dad. And all kinds of bad things would happen, apparently. But here you are, lying to Dad? Was there a caveat in there? Well, parents that are shame-based will not liberate their children from their own insanity. Instead, they will traumatize them deeper into it. Hit on the face, to glare. Don't you dare talk about it. Don't even think about it. Don't even think about it. Well, there's a problem. You're sending me to school to think and grow up, but don't even think about the insanity being brainwashed in through this hypercarbylation of back and forth. I'm going to do this, don't do that. I'm going to do it, don't do that. Don't think about it, don't talk. I mean, how the fuck is a kid going to get through that? And of course, they don't, and they're not, and that's institutionalized into the cult. So, So when you realize your parents are pathologically insane in almost every respect, then the question is, what do you do about it? How do you respond to a pathologically insane person who happens to be holding the key, literally, to your survival and your human needs at every level? See, and most children just say, it's all my fault. I'm so sorry I was born. I'm so sorry I was not psychically gifted with the magical way through the maze that you've created. I'm so sorry that I take up your time. Obviously, that was too big of an equation for you to grasp, you the parent, but I apologize. At 5 years old, I should have figured out how to change my own this and feed myself and all this. And I'm sorry I took, cost you money. Obviously, that was a little bit of a stretch for you to deduce as well, because you can go cradle to grave in our cult without getting competent training. You see, you as a parent in this cult do not get told a very important detail. You're going to spend $400,000 in the United States raising your child. And the taxpayer is going to spend even more. And then because we incarcerate 1% of our population, then the taxpayer is going to spend, a few $100,000 for that. You're going to cost a lot of money. Do you have $400,000 laying around that couldn't be put into an investment account or couldn't go towards funding? What about planting 400,000 trees for $1 a piece and becoming a carbon neutral culture? No. We couldn't think about anything so rational. We couldn't possibly budget. Is this really the appropriate best use of $400,000 at this moment in our lives? No. That would be too intelligent. So, 5-year-olds there left apologizing. We don't have any money because you broke the plate. We're going to go bankrupt. And of course, the child is in a dependent state on these completely irresponsible people who are blaming the child. Your father. It's like, I apologize. What can I do? Shall I kill him? I wish I could have been born without a father. I wish you had chosen a different father now that it comes to it, but, there's not much I can do about it. But there's all this blame that is floating around, because when you have children, grown-up children and grown-up adolescents, they don't know how to respond competently in their reality, and so they blame other people, because then they don't have to be competent. Because if I can just say, it's your fault, then it doesn't become quite as urgent that 1, I need to respond, 2, I don't know how, and 3, I don't want to figure it out, and so I'll just blame and criticize. Now this builds up in the child. They take it on. I'm unlovable. I apologize for existing. I apologize for taking up money. I apologize for trying to be a sane person by questioning your insanity. I didn't realize it was so upsetting to realize you were crazy. Or maybe I actually thought you did have a sophisticated answer, and it never occurred to me that you were just, blowing smoke and just copying exactly what your mother said. In other words, the child blames themselves for their parents' inadequacies. And when the parent is kinder to the child that blames themselves and criticizes themselves, then the child does it some more. The only trouble is, in this dynamic of endless criticism and shame and stuff on the child, is, first of all, it doesn't work, because the child was hoping to be loved. If they took all this on and believed in their parents, the child was hoping to be loved, and grown children and grown adolescents don't know how to love themselves or other people. That's what you need adults for. But we've stopped raising adults, if we ever did. And we've killed off the ancestors that did raise adults. Many of the indigenous tribes in the Americas had initiation rites to turn a 12-year-old, a 15-year-old into a man through initiation. into an adult through a transcendent experience that involved the facing of death and surviving it. Well, we, while shame dumping and all of that, coddle our children and say, oh my goodness, be safe, keep it safe, don't, there's a scary world out there, don't face death, stay in the known terrain. We don't send our young people into the abyss and invite them to have a sacred union, a connection with their innate being, and return to the tribe, initiated in who they are, in a connection to something that transcends the cult. No, don't think about that. Just go and get a job and buy a car. Okay, you're not happy yet, buy another car. And so we have children. And when you have children, they're incapable of loving. A child is dependent on an adult for their needs, but there are so few of them. Well, anyway, all this pours up in this. So I have this tremendous fear of existing, and then I have this tremendous fear of not existing. Because if I exist, actually have thoughts and ideas, see, these are my thoughts and ideas. And parents don't want to hear them. Why? Because they upset the parent from the mythology of the status quo. Because the parent doesn't have an answer as a child, as an adolescent on the inside. They don't know how to deal with this any more than their child does. And in a cult that shames them for not knowing, they don't want to admit that they don't know how to deal with this. And so, what do? Well, they tell the child to shut up, to go to school, not to question the parent and all that. And because the child I didn't want to be hit. I didn't want to be glared at. I didn't want to be shouted at. I wanted to understand, but that was intolerable to shame-based children. Well, I became, destructive. I wanted to hit trees and things because trees didn't talk back, and I wanted to see my younger siblings suffer as well, so that I wasn't so alone. And I took in as much of this criticism and stupidity and blame and incompetence as I possibly could, not questioning the parent, the system, the teacher. Because the exact same thing is going on at school. When a teacher looks at a traumatized boy, who the statistics show is always in front of them in America, when the teacher looks at a traumatized boy and says, I'm the leader, I'm the teacher, but I do not have a single hour of emotional literacy. I don't have a single hour of traumatic literacy. I don't know what the symptoms of trauma are. And under no conceivable circumstances will I do anything to stop the abuse that's going on in your house. But I've got something far more interesting. See, cat, run. Now, could I just have all of your attention for a couple of years to absolutely ignore the most pressing crisis of your entire life and focus on a cat that doesn't exist running on a blackboard that's just little white lines on a black surface, pretending that this is the epitome of intelligence. You realize your teacher is pathologically insane. They're so insane, they don't realize that they're insane. Sound like anyone? It sounds like your parents. So you're surrounded by morons. And the question is, what do you do at 6 years old? What do you do at 7 years old? When the slightest indication that this cult of cards doesn't have a lot of substance underpinning it, other than being able to rightly claim that they consume more natural resources per capita while expanding their population more per capita than pretty much any cult in human history. So, if that's progress, to produce more people per capita and consume more energy, more natural resources per capita than anyone else, and not be terribly happy as a result, then you have to hand it to them. But if you think about it, in a sustainable ecology, there is an unsustainable point. Because if your claim to fame and you're a business run, because we understand business more than we understand ecology, because we were raised in a capitalist cult rather than an ecological cult. We don't say we're an ecological country. You better be. Meaning, if you're spending more natural resources than you're generating, the fact that you're a successful capitalist doesn't really matter. Because if you're making less money, you see, if you're making less money than you are spending, you go bankrupt. And as a capitalist, you will realize this is a disaster. But if you are spending more natural resources than you are generating, a non-ecological cult, a cult that doesn't even really understand ecology because it's not taught, a non-ecological cult, this is just fine. We'll not get it. And so, this is just fine. Let's see what's going on here. So, there's only a little context here. I'm training a housekeeper. She doesn't understand English very well. So I was interrupting the video then. I've got to go to a chiropractor appointment. And so sometimes this spontaneous thing, doesn't work out so well. Because there isn't enough time to meander into all of this and stay in a flow. And so we'll have to see, where we are when we come back. But what goes in, all this criticism and shame and fear and terror that goes in, under fear, because it doesn't go in naturally, because children are naturally intelligent, they're naturally sane, they naturally connect with others through truths, and you can't do that in a shame-based cult. Through fear of violence and punishment and humiliation and not being able to eat any dessert and all that. The parent shoves a dysfunctional cult into the child. And at some point in the desperate frenzy to meet one's needs, beginning with making enough money in a cult that is about capital, you realize it was all a lie, that the parents didn't actually know what they were talking about, and that's why they didn't want you to challenge them, not because they knew so much that you were wasting their time challenging them. That your therapists don't necessarily know all that much, that your government is certainly out to lunch in many respects, that your teachers were as clueless as your parents in many ways, and you were shoved into not examining a set of dogmas that have caused tremendous suffering to you and your ecology, and now you're told to shut up about it and just be happy because you've made a bunch of paper called money, which doesn't seem to be doing it other than paying the bills. And here you are, and then you're told to have a positive attitude about the whole thing. Well, it's nonsense. But that's not what the cult wants to hear. How you doing? How you doing? How you doing? Says the frantic cult every moment of every day. How you doing? How you doing? I'm doing great. Oh, good. Let's make sure everyone else is going to lie, because the whole thing could collapse if we start talking about, 20% depression. What's the incest rate? Is it 5%? Well, we know the pedophilic rate of Catholic priests is 5%. What's the incest rate for parents? Let's not talk about that. What's this? How is this great exactly? We don't want to talk about it. And just shut up. Now you're old and have nothing to say, or you're negative, and, it's complete and utter nonsense. Again, it's like, how long am I supposed to just put up with this nonsense my entire life? Do I have any fragments of sanity in this mix? My dog is far more intelligent. And so naturally he's condescended upon, and you can't learn from the intelligent. That just ruins the dogma and the cult. So, fine. Animals are more intelligent than human beings. They consume less energy per unit of happiness, ecologically and otherwise. So we're going to kill them. Psychologically, they're just animals. It's like second-class citizens, of course. Speciesism. And yet, my dog on almost every day does more intelligent things than I do. That's an interesting thing to study. How much energy does Philip use generating sustainable well-being ecologically and otherwise? Tremendous amount. Right now, he's making me happy. At least as much as you are. So this critic, I think, partly comes from being endlessly terrified and wanting to pivot from being terrified and blamed to feeling the release of that terror by giving it back to the cult that gave it to me. In other words, to give it back to you. Because as much as I was criticized, directly and indirectly, as a child and adolescent, I can easily criticize the cult and all of its members for just about everything, because it's so incompetent, it's so inefficient relative to any objective metrics. And so we're going to be interrupted, so off we go. Anyway, the birth of the critic. a rebellion against insanity, an externalization of the wound, a statement of liberation from the oppression of not being able to think, and an awakening from the dream.